Picture this for a moment, because what happened in that dusty little town will absolutely stop you in your tracks. A 19-year-old girl named Clara stood frozen on a wooden porch while her own father counted a stack of silver coins in front of a stranger. Nobody in that crowd said a single word, because everyone already understood exactly what kind of deal had just been made. Her father, buried under gambling debts that had chased him for nearly 3 years, looked at his daughter like she was nothing more than a piece of furniture to be sold off quickly. The stranger accepting the coins was a rancher named Jonas Whitfield, a man the whole territory knew as quiet, hardened, and completely alone since the day he lost his family to sickness. Clara felt her stomach twist as she realized her own future had just been decided by 2 men who barely looked her in the eye. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything except stand there while her life was handed away like cattle at auction. But something strange happened in that terrible moment, something nobody watching could have predicted at all. Jonas stepped forward, took off his hat, and spoke to her directly instead of to her father, asking if she was willing before he ever accepted the deal. That single question changed everything, and you need to stick around to see exactly how far this story goes. Clara had grown up hearing stories about ranchers who worked their wives half to death and treated them worse than the animals in the barn. She braced herself for cruelty the entire ride out to his property, gripping the edge of the wagon until her knuckles turned white with fear. Jonas said almost nothing during that long journey, but he kept glancing over at her like he was trying to figure out how badly she was hurting inside. When they finally arrived at his modest ranch house, he didn't order her around or demand anything the way she expected a new husband to behave. Instead, he showed her to the nicest room in the house, the one that had belonged to his late wife before the fever took her away. He told Clara plainly that she didn't have to share his bed until she felt ready, and that surprised her more than anything he could have said. She lay awake that first night wondering what kind of trick this quiet cowboy was playing on a frightened girl like her. Days passed, and Jonas kept proving himself different, bringing her wildflowers from the fields without ever once asking for anything back in return. He noticed the smallest details about her, like how she liked her coffee or which chores exhausted her most by the end of the day. Something inside Clara's chest began loosening slightly, though she still refused to fully trust a man who had technically bought her like property. Word spread quickly through town about the strange arrangement between the gambler's daughter and the lonely rancher everyone considered too damaged to love again. Some folks whispered that Jonas only wanted a free housekeeper, while others insisted he simply wanted someone to replace the wife he had lost. Clara heard every rumor eventually, and each one made her wonder which version of the story actually reflected the truth of her situation. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry near the barn, she overheard 2 ranch hands mocking Jonas for treating a bought bride like fine china instead of livestock. Jonas walked past them without saying anything, but later that evening he told Clara she should never listen to men who measured worth with money. His voice carried an anger she hadn't heard from him before, sharp and protective in a way that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She started noticing how he defended her honor whenever anyone questioned the nature of their sudden marriage arrangement in town. Slowly, without either of them announcing it out loud, something resembling genuine respect began growing steadily between 2 people forced together by desperation and debt. Clara caught herself smiling at small things he did, like fixing the porch step so she wouldn't trip carrying water each morning. She still hadn't forgiven her father, but she found herself grateful for the strange fate that had placed her here instead. One stormy night changed everything between them, the kind of storm that rattled windows and made the entire ranch feel dangerously alive with wind and thunder. Clara woke up terrified, memories flooding back of a tornado that had destroyed her childhood home when she was only 7 years old. She stumbled into the main room shaking, and found Jonas already awake, sitting near the fireplace with worry etched deeply across his face. Without hesitation, he pulled a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her, staying close enough that she could feel his steady, calming presence. He didn't say much, because Jonas had never been a man of many words, but his silence somehow felt safer than any promise spoken aloud. They sat together until the storm passed, watching the flames dance while rain hammered relentlessly against the wooden roof above their heads. Clara finally asked him why he had chosen her that day at the auction instead of walking away like any sensible man would have done. Jonas admitted quietly that he had seen something familiar in her eyes, a loneliness that mirrored the emptiness he had carried since losing his own family years earlier. That confession broke something open inside Clara, a wall she had built the moment her father sold her without asking her opinion. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she reached out and took his hand, and neither of them pulled away from that touch. From that night forward, their relationship shifted into something neither of them expected when this arrangement had first been forced upon their unwilling lives. Clara began joining Jonas on his morning rounds around the property, learning how to check fences and tend to the cattle he loved dearly. He taught her patiently, never once raising his voice even when she made mistakes that would have angered a lesser man completely. She discovered a gentleness in him that contradicted every harsh rumor the townsfolk had spread about hardened ranchers living alone on the frontier. Meanwhile, her father occasionally rode by the property, hoping to borrow money from the daughter he had so easily discarded for quick cash. Jonas always stood firmly beside Clara during these visits, making it clear that her father no longer held any power over her decisions. Clara found herself standing taller each time, no longer the frightened girl who had trembled on that porch months earlier. She realized that Jonas had given her something her own father never once provided, a sense of genuine safety and unwavering respect. The ranch hands who once mocked their marriage started treating Clara with newfound admiration, noticing how capably she managed the household and animals alike. Even the shopkeepers in town began greeting her warmly, sensing that something remarkable had blossomed from what once looked like a tragic transaction. Autumn arrived, bringing with it a harvest celebration that the entire town gathered for every single year without fail. Jonas surprised Clara by asking her to dance in front of everyone, something he hadn't done publicly since his first wife had passed away. The crowd fell silent for a moment, watching the supposedly cold rancher smile freely while spinning his young wife across the wooden dance floor. Clara felt every eye in town watching them, but for once she didn't feel like a spectacle or a scandal anymore. She felt like a woman being cherished, held gently by a man who had chosen kindness over the cruelty everyone expected from him. Her father watched from the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable, perhaps recognizing too late what he had carelessly thrown away that day. Clara refused to let his presence ruin the joy blooming inside her chest as Jonas twirled her beneath the string lights overhead. Later that night, walking home under a sky full of stars, Jonas admitted something he had never spoken aloud to anyone before that evening. He told her that he loved her, not out of obligation or loneliness, but because she had brought life back into his quiet existence. Clara cried tears of genuine happiness, finally understanding that fate sometimes disguises the greatest blessings inside the darkest possible beginnings. Winter tested their bond in ways neither of them had prepared for when the harshest blizzard in years buried the entire valley completely. Cattle went missing, supplies ran low, and Jonas spent exhausting days riding through freezing winds searching for animals scattered across the frozen range. Clara refused to sit idle inside the warm house while her husband risked his life alone in such dangerous, unforgiving weather conditions. She packed supplies, bundled herself in thick furs, and rode out beside him despite his protests that she should stay safely indoors. Together they found nearly a dozen cattle trapped in a ravine, guiding them slowly back toward shelter before the temperature dropped further still. Exhausted and freezing, they returned home long after dark, collapsing together near the fireplace with barely enough strength to remove their frozen boots. Jonas looked at her with something like awe, realizing that Clara had become far more than a wife thrust upon him by circumstance. She had become his true partner, someone who faced danger beside him instead of waiting passively behind closed doors for his return. That night, wrapped in blankets and exhaustion, Clara whispered that she couldn't imagine her life belonging to anyone else in this world. Jonas held her tighter, silently promising himself that he would spend every remaining day proving he deserved a woman this remarkable and brave. Spring eventually returned, melting away the harsh memories of winter and bringing new growth across the entire ranch they now shared completely together. Clara noticed subtle changes in herself, feeling tired more often and craving foods she normally avoided without any clear explanation for the shift. When the town doctor confirmed she was expecting a child, Jonas nearly dropped the cup of coffee resting steadily in his weathered hands. He hadn't allowed himself to imagine having a family again after losing everything so painfully several years before meeting Clara. The news transformed him almost overnight, adding an extra gentleness to his voice whenever he spoke to her from that moment forward. He built a small cradle by hand during quiet evenings, carving intricate patterns into the wood with careful, loving attention to every detail. Clara watched him work some nights, marveling at how far they had traveled since that terrifying day on her father's porch. She sometimes wondered whether her father ever thought about the family he had missed out on knowing because of his own selfish choices. Jonas told her repeatedly that her father's absence was a loss belonging entirely to him, not something Clara needed to carry any longer. Their unborn child represented a fresh beginning, untouched by debt, betrayal, or the desperate transactions that had once defined Clara's entire young life. Not everyone in town accepted their happiness gracefully, and one particular rival rancher named Bo Harmon grew increasingly jealous of Jonas's newfound contentment and fortune. Bo had wanted to purchase Clara himself at that original auction, only to be outbid by Jonas at the very last moment. He began spreading vicious rumors, claiming that Jonas had stolen cattle from neighboring properties to afford the price he paid for her. Clara heard these accusations while shopping in town one afternoon, and her hands trembled with anger at hearing her husband's name dragged through such filth. She rushed home immediately, desperate to warn Jonas before these lies could spread further and damage the reputation he had worked so hard to rebuild. Jonas listened calmly, then rode into town alone to confront Bo directly in front of witnesses gathered outside the general store. He demanded proof for these accusations, standing tall and unshaken while Bo stumbled through excuses that convinced absolutely nobody standing nearby that day. The sheriff eventually intervened, warning Bo that spreading false rumors could result in serious legal consequences he clearly hadn't considered beforehand. Clara felt immense pride watching her husband defend their family's honor without resorting to violence or losing his composure under pressure. From that day forward, Bo kept his distance, and the town's respect for Jonas and Clara only continued growing stronger. As Clara's pregnancy progressed, her father made one final desperate attempt to reinsert himself into her life, arriving unannounced during a particularly quiet Sunday afternoon. He claimed he wanted to make amends, admitting through tears that selling his own daughter had been the worst mistake of his entire troubled life. Clara stood frozen at the doorway, unsure whether to feel compassion or the anger that had simmered inside her for nearly a year now. Jonas stepped beside her, silent but present, letting Clara decide entirely for herself how she wanted to handle this unexpected, painful confrontation. She finally spoke, telling her father that forgiveness wasn't something she could offer immediately, though she wasn't closing the door completely forever. She explained that Jonas had taught her what real love looked like, something her father had never once demonstrated throughout her difficult childhood. Her father left quietly that day, promising to prove himself worthy of a relationship with the grandchild soon to be born into this family. Clara wept afterward, not from sadness, but from relief at finally speaking honestly to the man who had once controlled her entire future. Jonas held her through those tears, reminding her gently that healing didn't require forgetting the pain that had shaped her into who she'd become. Together, they faced whatever uncertain future awaited them, stronger now than either could have imagined possible during that terrible auction day. The baby arrived on a warm spring morning, filling the ranch house with cries that Jonas swore were the most beautiful sounds he'd ever heard. Clara held their daughter close, exhausted but radiant, watching her husband's hardened features soften completely at the sight of his newborn child. They named her Hope, a decision that felt fitting considering everything this family had overcome since that fateful transaction months earlier. Neighbors arrived throughout the following weeks bringing gifts, food, and warm congratulations for a couple that had genuinely earned the community's respect and admiration. Even Clara's father visited cautiously, bringing a small handmade gift and asking permission before holding his granddaughter for the very first time. Jonas watched carefully but allowed the moment, recognizing that healing sometimes required small, uncomfortable steps taken slowly over considerable time. Clara noticed tears in her father's eyes as he held hope, perhaps finally understanding the depth of what he had almost destroyed forever. The family that had begun through desperation and debt now flourished through genuine love, patience, and mutual respect neither expected to find. Jonas often told Clara that purchasing her that day remained his greatest regret, not because he didn't want her, but because she deserved better beginnings. Clara always corrected him gently, insisting that their unusual beginning had led them exactly toward the beautiful life they now shared together. Years passed, and the story of Clara and Jonas became something of a legend throughout the surrounding territory, told and retold by those who witnessed their journey. Young women in similar desperate situations sometimes sought Clara's advice, wanting to understand how she transformed such painful circumstances into genuine, lasting happiness. She always told them that survival required courage, but building something beautiful afterward required patience, trust, and a willingness to remain open despite deep wounds. Jonas never stopped bringing her wildflowers, even decades later, a small habit that reminded Clara daily of exactly how their love had first blossomed. Their ranch grew larger, more prosperous, and eventually became known throughout the region as a place built on fairness rather than exploitation or cruelty. Hope grew into a confident young woman herself, raised watching parents who demonstrated daily that respect mattered more than any transaction ever could. Clara's father eventually earned back some trust, visiting regularly and helping occasionally with ranch work as a way of proving his changed character. The scars from that original auction never fully disappeared, but they became simply part of a larger, richer story rather than defining moments. Jonas often reflected that loneliness had shaped much of his early life, until fate delivered him a treasure disguised as a desperate transaction. Their love story proved that even the darkest beginnings sometimes lead toward futures nobody watching that terrible day could have possibly imagined. Looking back now, it's clear that what seemed like an unforgivable betrayal actually became the doorway toward genuine love neither Clara nor Jonas expected finding. Sometimes the cruelest moments in life accidentally position us exactly where we're meant to discover people who truly value our worth. Clara's father made a devastating choice driven by desperation, yet fate placed her with someone capable of undoing that damage through patience and kindness. Jonas, hardened by loss and loneliness, rediscovered his capacity for love because a frightened young woman needed exactly the safety he could provide. Their story reminds us that circumstances don't always determine outcomes, and sometimes the most broken beginnings produce the strongest, most resilient relationships imaginable. It also reminds us that treating people with dignity, especially those society has undervalued or discarded, can transform entire lives beyond recognition. Clara never forgot the terror of that auction day, but she also never let it define the remarkable woman she eventually became. Jonas proved that quiet, steady kindness often speaks louder than grand gestures, especially to someone who has never experienced genuine respect before. Their ranch still stands today, passed down through generations who know the incredible story of resilience that built its very foundation. If this story moved you even slightly, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and tell us your thoughts down in the comments below.